There is a moment in the Old Testament when a man walks into the night with one name and comes out at sunrise with another. But he does not come out untouched. He comes out limping. That is the strange beauty of Jacob's story. God does not simply meet him with a gentle word. God meets him in the dark. God does not merely comfort him. God wrestles him. God does not give him a new name while Jacob is standing tall in victory. He gives him a new name when Jacob is wounded, exhausted, clinging, and finally honest. This is not just the story of a man receiving a new label. It is the story of a deceiver becoming a witness, a fugitive becoming a father, a man of fear becoming the beginning of a nation. And here's the central truth that holds the whole story together. God changed Jacob's name not to erase his past, but to transform his struggle into a calling. Jacob becomes Israel. The heel grabber becomes the one who wrestles with God. The man who spent his life trying to seize blessing learns that blessing is not stolen by manipulation. It is received through surrender. Not surrender that gives up faith, but surrender that gives up control. Before we come to the river Jabbok, we need to step into Jacob's world. This is the world of Genesis, before Israel is a kingdom, before there is a temple in Jerusalem, before Moses, before Sinai, before David's throne. There are no Israelite kings yet. There is no national army, no palace, no written constitution. There are families, clans, tents, wells, herds, marriages, rivalries, promises, and long journeys through Canaan and Mesopotamia. In this world, a name is not a small thing. A name is not merely what people call you when dinner is ready. In the biblical imagination, a name often carries identity, character, destiny, and mission. When God changes a name, he is not doing cosmetic editing. He is announcing a new reality. Abram becomes Abraham, the father of many nations. Sarai becomes Sarah, a princess connected to the promise. Simon becomes Peter, the rock-like witness in the story of the church. And Jacob becomes Israel. But Jacob's name is painful before it is glorious. Genesis 25 tells us that Jacob and Esau were twins, already struggling before birth. Esau comes out first, red and hairy. Then comes Jacob, holding Esau's heel. So he is named Jacob, Yaakov in Hebrew, a name connected to the word for heel. But in the story, the name grows darker. It begins to carry the idea of grasping, supplanting, taking the place of another. Later, when Jacob deceives his father Isaac and takes the blessing meant for Esau, Esau cries out in Genesis 27:36, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times." That sentence is like a mirror. It shows us how the name has become a biography. Jacob is a man who wants blessing, but he does not yet know how to trust the God who gives blessing. He wants the birthright, so he bargains with a hungry brother. He wants the blessing, so he wears another man's clothes. He wants security, so he calculates, plans, divides, negotiates, and maneuvers. He is clever, but not free. He is chosen, but not whole. He believes in God's promise, but he keeps trying to help God by controlling everyone around him. That is the first movement of Jacob's life, the hand on the heel. He is always reaching, always grabbing, always afraid that if he does not seize the moment, someone else will take what he needs. And perhaps this is why Jacob feels so painfully modern. He is not a cartoon villain. He is not evil in a simple way. He is a complicated man. He loves. He fears. He works hard. He suffers. He is deceived by Laban just as he deceived his father. He knows exile. He knows family pain. He knows what it means to want God's promise and still live as though everything depends on his own cleverness. And here we should pause and gather the story so far. Jacob is chosen by God, but he is still shaped by fear. He carries promise, but he also carries patterns. He has received covenant mercy, but his character still needs deep surgery. The question is not whether God has a plan for Jacob. The question is what kind of man Jacob must become in order to carry that plan. That is where the story moves toward the river. After years away from home, Jacob begins the journey back to Canaan. He has wives, children, servants, flocks, and wealth. Outwardly, he looks successful. But inside, an old fear rises again. Esau is coming, and not alone. Genesis 32 says Esau is approaching with 400 men. 400 men. To Jacob, that number sounds like judgment walking on human feet. The past is no longer buried. It is marching toward him. The brother he deceived is coming from the horizon. The blessing he stole has not erased the wound he caused. Time has passed, but time alone has not healed the story. So Jacob does what Jacob has always done. He plans. He divides his people into groups, thinking, if Esau attacks one group, the other may escape. He sends gifts ahead: goats, sheep, camels, cattle, donkeys. He arranges the encounter like a strategist trying to soften an enemy. And yet beneath all the planning, something new begins to emerge. Jacob prays. His prayer in Genesis 32 is one of the most honest prayers in the patriarchal stories. He says, in effect, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, you told me to return. You promised to do me good. I am not worthy of all the steadfast love and faithfulness you have shown me. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother." That line, "I am not worthy," is crucial. Jacob is beginning to see the truth. He has not earned his life. He has not mastered his destiny. He has not controlled the covenant. He crossed the Jordan years earlier with only his staff, and now he returns with two camps. Everything he has is mercy. Everything he fears is real. Everything he needs is beyond his control. Then comes one of the most haunting sentences in Genesis, "And Jacob was left alone." His family has crossed the river. His possessions are gone from view. His plans have been sent ahead. The noise of the camp fades. The night closes around him. He stands by the Jabbok with nothing to hide behind. This is the second movement. The man in the night. Genesis 32:24 says, "And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day." At first, the text calls the figure simply a man. The Hebrew word is ish. The mystery is intentional. Who is this stranger? A man? An angel? A divine messenger? A manifestation of God's own presence. The prophet Hosea, reflecting on this story in Hosea 12, says Jacob strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. Genesis itself says Jacob names the place Peniel, meaning the face of God, because, as Jacob says, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Different traditions have understood the mysterious wrestler in different ways. Many Jewish interpreters have seen him as an angelic representative of God, and some traditions identify him with the angelic power connected to Esau. Some Christian interpreters have seen here a pre-incarnate appearance of the Son of God, because this figure speaks with divine authority, gives blessing, and renames Jacob. Others read the scene as a prophetic vision, or as a profound outward expression of Jacob's inward struggle. But whatever interpretive path we take, the text wants us to feel this. Jacob is not merely fighting a stranger. He is being brought into direct confrontation with God, with his past, with his fear, and with the identity he has carried since birth. And notice the irony. Jacob has wrestled all his life. He wrestled with Esau in the womb. He wrestled for the birthright. He wrestled with Isaac through deception. He wrestled with Laban through years of labor and conflict. He wrestled with circumstances, with family, with scarcity, with rivalry. But now, at last, he wrestles with God. This matters because God often meets us at the level of our deepest pattern. Jacob is a grasper, so God meets him in a wrestling match. Jacob is a man who will not let go, so God enters the night and asks what his clinging is really for. Jacob has used his hands to seize, to disguise, to bargain, to protect himself. Now, those same hands cling to God for blessing. Not stealing now, clinging, not manipulating now, pleading, not hiding behind another man's clothes now, standing wounded in his own skin. Then comes the turning point. The mysterious wrestler touches Jacob's hip, and Jacob's hip is put out of joint. This is not a fair fight between equals. The one who wrestles with Jacob has only to touch him, and Jacob is wounded. That single touch reveals the truth. Jacob does not win because he is stronger than God. He prevails because he refuses to let go of the only one who can bless him. This is the paradox of biblical faith. Jacob wins by being wounded. He is strengthened by being weakened. He receives a new name at the very moment his old confidence is broken. The hip matters. The legs are what carry a man forward. They are the instruments of movement, escape, pursuit, and control. Jacob had used his life to run. From Esau, from home, from consequences, from danger. Now God touches the place of running. From this moment, Jacob will never walk the same way again. Grace does not always leave us looking more impressive. Sometimes grace leaves a limp. But the limp is not a curse. It is a memory. It is the body remembering what the soul learned. I am alive because God was merciful. I move forward because God blessed me. I am not self-made. I am held. Now the stranger says, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob answers, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." That sentence is one of the most powerful pictures of prayer in the Bible. Prayer is not always calm music and folded hands. Sometimes prayer is a man in the dark, wounded and desperate, holding on to God with everything he has left. Sometimes prayer is not having the right words, only refusing to release the one who has the blessing. Sometimes faith sounds like this: "I do not understand you, but I will not leave you. I am afraid, but I will not let go. I am wounded, but I still need your blessing." Then the stranger asks, "What is your name?" Of course, God knows his name. The question is not for information. It is for confession. What is your name? Jacob. In that moment, Jacob has to say the name that carries his story: heel-grabber, supplanter, deceiver. The name Esau cried out in bitterness. The name tied to disguise and calculation. Before he can receive the new name, he must stop pretending about the old one. This is often how God heals. He brings truth into the light. Not to shame us forever, but to free us deeply. God does not rename a fake self. He renames the real person who finally comes into the open. Then comes the word of transformation. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. Israel, Yisrael. The name contains El, the word for God. The old name Jacob points back to the heel, to human struggle and grasping. The new name brings God into the center of the identity. The exact meaning of Israel has been discussed in different ways. The explanation given in Genesis connects it with striving or wrestling with God. Some also note that the structure may carry the sense that God strives, God rules, or God prevails. But in the flow of the story, the point is clear. Jacob's life will no longer be defined merely by grasping at the heel of another. It will be defined by his encounter with God. He is still Jacob, but now he is Israel. And here we need to pause again. The name change is not a reward for moral perfection. Jacob does not become sinless at sunrise. His family remains complicated. His sons will bring him grief. The story ahead still contains favoritism, jealousy, violence, deception, and sorrow. But something decisive has happened. Jacob now carries a name that speaks of God's claim over his struggle. His wounds are no longer meaningless. His conflict is no longer only survival. His life has been folded into covenant purpose. God changed Jacob's name because Jacob's old identity was too small for his calling. A man who lives only by fear cannot father a people of promise. A man who only grasps cannot become the ancestor of a nation called to bless the earth. A man who only manipulates cannot carry the testimony of God's faithfulness. So God does not merely give Jacob a better strategy. God gives him a new identity. But there is another mystery. If God says your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, why does the Bible continue to call him Jacob afterward? This is different from Abraham. After Abram becomes Abraham, the old name largely disappears. But Jacob and Israel continue to stand side by side in the biblical story. Sometimes the text says Jacob, sometimes it says Israel. Even later scripture uses both, the house of Jacob, the children of Israel. This is not only a literary puzzle, it is a spiritual insight. The Bible understands human transformation more honestly than we often do. God gives a new identity, but the old patterns do not vanish like smoke. Jacob is renamed, but Jacob is still learning to live as Israel. The new name is true, but the old story still echoes. Grace is decisive, but growth is often gradual. This is important for anyone who has ever felt discouraged by spiritual change. You may have met God in a real way. You may have received mercy. You may belong to Christ, and yet you still feel the pull of old fears, old habits, old defenses, old wounds. The Bible does not flatter us with shallow transformation. It shows us a man renamed by God who still walks through a complicated life. But the presence of the old name does not cancel the new name. This is the third movement, the limp in the sunrise. Genesis says the sun rose upon Jacob as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. What an image. The night is over, the blessing has been given, the name has been changed, the danger with Esau still lies ahead. But Jacob walks into the morning as Israel, and every step hurts. The sunrise does not remove the limp. The blessing does not erase the wound. The new name does not make life easy. But now the wound has meaning. Now the limp tells the truth. Jacob is no longer the man who survives by escaping. He is the man who has met God and lived, and the very next chapter shows the fruit of this transformation. Jacob finally meets Esau. The moment that had terrified him arrives, but instead of slaughter, there is embrace. Esau runs to meet Jacob, embraces him, falls on his neck, kisses him, and they weep. Jacob, who once took his brother's blessing through deception, now bows before him and gives generously. He says something astonishing, "For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me." Why does Jacob speak this way? Because the night before, he had seen the face of God and survived. Now he can face his brother. The encounter with God changes the encounter with man. When God has dealt with Jacob's fear, Jacob can stop seeing Esau only as a threat. He can begin to move toward reconciliation. This does not mean every broken relationship is instantly repaired. It does not mean trust is automatic. It does not mean the Bible ignores consequences. But it does show that God's work in us is never private only. The new name must touch old relationships. The blessing must move into embodied life. The altar must become ethics. Prayer must become humility. Worship must become reconciliation. Now we can see why this story becomes bigger than Jacob himself. The name Israel becomes the name of a people. Jacob's sons become the tribes of Israel. The story of one man wrestling in the dark becomes a pattern for a nation that will wrestle with God across generations. Israel will wrestle in Egypt under Pharaoh's oppression. Israel will wrestle in the wilderness with hunger, thirst, fear, and unbelief. Israel will wrestle at Sinai with the holiness of God. Israel will wrestle in the land with idols, kings, prophets, exile, and return. Again and again, the people carry the name of their father, Israel, the one who wrestles with God. This is one of the most realistic visions of faith in all Scripture. Faith is not presented as a life without conflict. Faith is not the absence of questions. Faith is not pretending that fear, injustice, grief, temptation, and pain are unreal. To be Israel is to be drawn into a relationship with God so real that even the struggle becomes part of the covenant. Biblical faith is not passive fatalism. It is not spiritual numbness. It is not smiling at the darkness and calling it light. It is wrestling honestly before God and refusing to seek blessing anywhere else. The prophets understand this. The Psalms understand this. Many Psalms sound like wrestling. How long, O Lord? Why do you hide your face? Do not be far from me. These are not prayers of unbelief. They are prayers of covenant intimacy. Strangers do not wrestle like this. Children do. Those who know God's promises wrestle with God because they know His character. And this brings us to Christ. We must be careful not to force every detail of Jacob's story into a symbol. But the movement of the story points us toward the gospel in a deep and natural way. Jacob receives blessing through a mysterious night of wrestling, but Jesus enters a darker night for us. In Gethsemane, he wrestles in prayer until his sweat becomes like drops of blood. On the cross, he bears not merely a wounded hip, but pierced hands, pierced feet, and a spear-torn side. Jacob clings and says, "Bless me." Jesus hangs on the cross so the blessing of Abraham may come to the nations. Jacob is wounded and lives. Christ is wounded and dies. But on the third day, the sun rises over an empty tomb. In Jesus, we see the truest Israel. He wrestles with temptation in the wilderness and remains faithful. He wrestles with the powers of sin, death, and evil, not by deception, but by obedience. He does not grasp at blessing. He gives himself in love. He does not steal the inheritance. He shares his inheritance with sinners. He does not manipulate the Father's will. He prays, "Not my will, but yours be done." And because of Christ, the deepest name change becomes possible for us. The gospel says that those who belong to him are no longer defined by the old names sin gave them, shame gave them, family history gave them, failure gave them, or fear gave them. In Christ, people are called forgiven, beloved, adopted, new creation, children of God, but just like Jacob, we often learn to live into that name through struggle. So what do we do with this today? First, we must ask, what old name are you still living under? Maybe your old name is failure. Maybe it is control. Maybe it is fear. Maybe it is resentment. Maybe it is performer, pretender, survivor, addict, victim, deceiver, abandoned one. Maybe no one calls you that out loud, but you hear it inside. You make decisions from it. You protect yourself because of it. You pray, but still reach for the heel. You believe God is good, but you still think blessing must be seized or it will be lost. Jacob's story invites you to bring that name into God's presence. Not polished, not disguised, not covered in Esau's clothing. Just honest. What is your name? That question still comes to the soul. Second, we must learn that real prayer may involve wrestling. Some people think strong faith never struggles, but Jacob's story says something different. Strong faith may struggle deeply, but it struggles toward God, not away from him. It refuses to let pain become distance. It refuses to let questions become escape. It refuses to let fear have the final word. There are nights when the most faithful prayer you can pray is, "Lord, I do not understand, but I will not let you go." Third, we must stop despising the limp. Many of us want blessing without weakness. We want testimony without scars. We want transformation without exposure. But Jacob limps into the sunrise, and that limp becomes part of the witness. The wound reminds him that he did not bless himself. He did not save himself. He did not master God. He was mastered by mercy. What is the limp in your life? A limitation, a grief, a failure God has redeemed, a weakness that keeps you dependent, a wound that makes you gentler with others? Not every wound is automatically holy. Pain can deform us if it is not brought to God. But in the hands of God, even the wound can become a place of remembrance. Not power, but dependence. Not disguise, but truth. Not running, but clinging. Not Jacob only, but Israel. Finally, Jacob's new name calls us to let our encounter with God change the way we face people. Jacob had to meet Esau. He had to face the brother he wounded. The blessing did not allow him to avoid reconciliation. It prepared him for it. Is there someone you need to face with humility? Someone you have wronged? Someone you fear? Someone whose face you cannot imagine seeing without anger or shame? Again, reconciliation is not always simple, and wisdom is needed where there has been real harm. But the gospel never lets us keep worship and relationships in separate rooms. The God who meets us in the night sends us into the morning differently. The story began with a man alone in the dark. It ends with a man limping into the sunrise. He is not less blessed because he limps. He limps because he has been blessed. He is not less chosen because he is wounded. He is wounded because God has dealt with him deeply. He is not less Israel because Jacob remains in the story. He is Israel because God has entered Jacob's story and claimed it for his purpose. So when you see Jacob by the river, do not only see an ancient patriarch, see a mirror. See the fearful planner, see the wounded believer, see the person who wants blessing but must learn surrender. See the soul that has spent years grasping, only to discover that the blessing comes when the hands stop stealing and start clinging to God. And above all, see the God who comes into the night. He does not wait for Jacob to become impressive. He meets him while he is afraid. He does not destroy Jacob for his past. He exposes it, wounds it, blesses it, and renames him. He turns a private struggle into a public calling. He turns a limp into a testimony. He turns Jacob into Israel. The sun still rises over Penuel. The river still speaks. The old name is not the end. The wound is not the end. The night is not the end. God is still the one who meets people in the dark and brings them into the morning with a new name.